Right. Hello, everybody. Edward Dodge here with another episode of Goddess Bible Study. We're going to introduce ourselves a little bit since we don't normally do that. But my name's Ed Dodge. I wrote History of the Goddess from the Ice Age to the Bible, and I'm kind of running this project. So I've been writing all these episodes of Goddess Bible Study, which is adapted from the book I wrote. And we're exploring the all the aspects in the Old Testament where the goddesses are and the priestesses and how it's telling the story of the divorce in the transition from paganism to monotheism. Divorce of the mother, that is. So I'll pass it off to Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Adams. I am a fully initiated high priestess and ordained minister. I'm a spiritual teacher. I'm also, my background, my education is in religion and women's studies, but I like to say I majored in the goddess. And I do all things mystical and magical. I teach and I lead, and I bring a lot of background into everything I do.
All right.
Very nice.
Thanks.
My name is Joshua Vanderplatz. I was formerly a Greek Orthodox priest and no longer. Left the church a number of years ago now and got my education at Purdue University in family studies. Got into theology, got a master's degree in theology. And so I've come to this study with some knowledge and background of theology and the Bible, and so really excited to have met Ed and ponder these really interesting topics of the goddess in the Old Testament.
All right. Well, thanks. All right. Well, I guess with that, we're going to get into this episode, which is part 2 of the 3 queen mothers being deposed in the Book of Kings. And we're going to ask a couple questions. This topic is focused on Jezebel, the most reviled woman in the Bible, one of the most famous characters in the Bible, who has a very loaded cultural weight and freight that she carries. And then secondly, we're going to talk about Jehu, who stages the coup and becomes the king of Israel after killing absolutely everybody. And it's really bloody spree that he goes on. He's the one who kills Jezebel. So we're going to ask a couple questions. The first one is, I'm just going to ask both of you guys, what do you think of Jezebel? Like, what does Jezebel mean to you? What does it bring to this topic before we get into the reading? And then we can talk about Jehu after. We have another question about what do you think about Jehu's bloody coup, and was it talk about either the Yahwist movement back then or like governments and kingship and broader society now, his rise to power, because he's a very successful guy actually. For all the bloody spills, he's a extremely successful king who rules for a long time. So with that, I think we'll pass it to Lisa. She was on the top before, but we'll let Lisa talk first about Jezebel. Any thoughts you have before we get started?
So because I'm not a big Bible or Christian person, and that's not what my focus was in school, I hear Jezebel just, out and about or whatever. And yeah, you think like sort of like whore, fallen woman, like all of these kinds of denigrating attributes that clearly come from patriarchy and monotheism and everything. And that's what you think of, and that's when you hear that. But this, reading the Substack and reading through some of those verses, and also being a woman of a certain age, I have a very different understanding of who she probably was versus how she's made out to be.
Thanks. And Josh?
Yeah, I think it's kind of, when you think about Jezebel, just within the tradition of the church, and when I say tradition among the church, I'm thinking all the churches of Catholics, Orthodox, Protestants. You do get this immediate image of a harlot of some kind. I think it's really important to just, there's no real evidence that Jezebel was a harlot, a sexual harlot, that we can see in the text. It was more, I think, what they were trying to make her out to be, as far as going after other gods, having, you know, being a queen of, you know, of Israel. So I think that's really important. And then that would later take on a whole nother, you know, outside of this story, there's reference to a Jezebel in the book of Revelation, which was probably a person named Jezebel in those times. It had nothing to do with the Old Testament Jezebel, but you have this same kind of, you have something going on where this idea of harlotry comes back in, and it becomes associated with this name. So I guess that's just my initial take, is that there's definitely been a tradition around, you know, some kind of, we're talking about a harlot here. But what I think is really interesting, when you look at it, it doesn't look like she was a harlot at all. It seems like she was very devoted to her husband. And when he was not stepping up, she stepped up, which reminds me of like a Roman emperor, Justinian. I forget his wife's name, but she almost has that same kind of quality. I forget her name. You know, it might come to me. Where you have just a very strong queen here. So those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah, me as well. Similarly, you know, the reputation when you hear the name Jezebel is that of the harlot, you know, the cunning, manipulative woman who's like manipulating her husband. And but really, you know, the harlotry is really that, you know, the line that really comes to mind culturally. But that's when I was so shocked when I was initially doing this research, when I wrote the book and reread these stories for the first time, as like in a long time, and I saw that, you know, she doesn't do anything wrong at all. Like from her perspective, you know, she is defending her traditional religion, and she doesn't she doesn't. I mean, well, there's a story about Naboth in the vineyard, which we'll get into. So she's slandered for sure, but she doesn't really do anything wrong. And so that's what really struck me. And also that about her being a harlot. Well, her father is a known figure. His name was Ethbal, and he was the king of Tyre and Sidon in the 9th century Phoenicia. And he was the high priest of Astarte, who then pulled his own palace coup and killed the king and became king. And so she definitely grew up in the Astarte cult for sure. Like that's like a known historical fact. So she definitely would have participated in all these traditions. But you guys are right that never in the text is she presented doing anything sexual at all.
Yeah, you know, when you think about chess, that, you know, the queen protects the king, and I think the what Joshua said, you know, she is devoted, and she's, you know, and I think in this text that you'll be reading, it demonstrates that she's, you know, like, hey, you're the king, you're powerful, you can have what you want, like you can do what you want, you're the king, you know. So she's reflecting back to him and helping lift him up, you know, reflecting back his power and lifting him up, you know, maybe in a moment where he feels like down, or, you know, low self-esteem or what have you. And I think, you know, that's what you do when you're in partnership. But certainly if you are a queen and you're lifting up your king, you're protecting him, you're helping him to feel strong, because I mean that's a tough job.
Yeah, it's great. It also, that reminds me of the Devi Sukta, which is one of the oldest passages from the Rig Veda from India. So even older than all this Old Testament stuff, totally Bronze Age. And there's the Devi Sukta, is the hymn to the goddess, the Devi being goddess in Hinduism, and the Sukta is like hymn. So it's like our prayer to the goddess or a hymn to the goddess. And in that, she's declaring all of her powers. But one of the lines that she has is, "I make my man mighty. I bend his bow." And she wants her man to be a warrior, and she's going to help him be a warrior. Because women don't want weak, effeminate men. They want strong men, as a general rule.
But actually, it's much more like how a priestess would work as well, and like helping her partner or her lover or her king or her man to like tap more deeply into his own power, into his integrity, into his greatness. And that's what a priestess does, but that's also what a queen does
That's good stuff.
if she's married. Yeah.
That's good stuff. Let's get into it. All right. So,
Okay.
Goddess Bible Study continues in the 9th century BCE with the Book of Kings. In this period, the Yahwist prophets confronted the traditional religion of Baal and the mother goddess Asherah, while the kingdoms of Israel and Judah were embroiled in ongoing wars with their neighbors and turbulent royal succession. This episode focuses on the prophets Elijah and Elisha, whose influence inspired the bloody coup by Jehu that overthrew the house of Omri in Israel. Queen Jezebel, the most vilified woman of the Bible, was famously assassinated, as was her daughter Athalia, the only woman to ever rule Jerusalem in her own right. It's a fun story about her, too. So at this time, Israel and Judah maintained an uneasy alliance while fighting wars with their neighbors in Aram, Edom, and Syria. Meanwhile, the shadow of the Assyrian Empire loomed on the horizon. King Ahab was a respected military commander, but was ultimately killed on the battlefield, setting off a succession of short-lived kings. The previous episode concluded with the Battle of the Prophets on Mount Carmel. According to the Bible, Elijah's victory brought rains back after 3 years of drought that had caused great suffering across the land. No archaeological record confirms this drought, but we do know that the Yahwists were ascendant in this time period. The story picks up with Elijah fleeing into the wilderness to escape Jezebel's wrath after killing the 450 prophets of Baal, while leaving the prophets of Asherah untouched. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. He traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God, and there Yahweh appeared to Elijah. So now we're into the Bible. This is book of 1 Kings 19, 14 to 17. Elijah replied, So Yahweh is speaking to Elijah. Elijah replied, I have been very zealous for Yahweh, God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. Yahweh said to him, Go back the way you came, and go to the desert of Damascus. When you are there, anoint Hazael, king over Aram. Also anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel, and anoint Elisha, son of Shaphath, from Abel Maholah, to succeed you as a prophet. Jehu will put to death any who escape the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death any who escape the sword of Jehu. The Bible portrays King Ahab as weak, passive, and sulking, while Queen Jezebel is cast as dominant, manipulative, and politically shrewd. The historical record tells a different story. Ahab was a formidable military leader, actively engaged in the wars of his day. Much of the Book of Kings reads as political propaganda, written to denigrate the enemies of the Yahwist movement, regardless of their actual popularity or effectiveness as rulers. The Bible is especially vitriolic towards Ahab and Jezebel, which suggests that they were real and serious adversaries. So this is 1 Kings 19:25. Surely there was never one like Ahab, who sold himself to do evil in the sight of Yahweh, incited by his wife Jezebel. He committed the most detectable acts by going after idols, just like the Amorites whom Yahweh had driven out before the Israelites. Jezebel is blamed for introducing idolatry and foreign gods to Israel, but these gods were native, and Jezebel was defending the traditional religion of her people. From her perspective, it was the Yahwists who were the dangerous insurgents, armed with revolutionary new ideas. In 1 Kings 21, Ahab covets a vineyard beside his palace, but the owner refuses to sell. Jezebel finds her husband sulking and mocks him. Aren't you the king? Get up, I will get you the vineyard. She then conspires to have the owner falsely accused of blasphemy and killed, allowing Ahab to seize the land. This is the story of Naboth in the vineyard. It's a long story, so I didn't want to copy the whole thing. And then the prophet Elijah hears about the murder and he confronts them. So this is Elijah. 1 Kings 21, Elijah says, I will bring calamity on you and consume your descendants. The dogs will devour Jezebel by the walls of Jezreel. Jezreel is the name of the town or Jezreel is the valley of Jezreel, but it's also where they have their palace. So this pivotal moment sees Jezebel's fate in the narrative. Not long after, Ahab is killed in battle, and his son proves a short-lived replacement. In Judah, the Yahwist king Jehoshaphat succeeds his father Asa and continues his reforms. Asa being the king who, in the last episode, deposed Queen Mother Maacah for carving an image of Asherah. So Maacah was the first of the three queen mothers. Jezebel is number 2, and then Athalia, that we'll get to, is number 3. So here we're talking about Jehoshaphat down in Judah, and we get I mentioned this one here because we have one of the references to the transgender Kadesh priests being expelled from Judah. And yet again, the Kadesha priestesses and prophets of Asherah are left untouched. This culture war played out over centuries, and the priestesses proved a much harder target than the trans folks. So this is 1 Kings 22, 41 to 46. In the 4th year of Ahab's reign over Israel, Jehoshaphat, son of Asa, became king of Judah. And Jehoshaphat walked in all the ways of his father Asa. He did not turn away from them, but he did what was right in the eyes of Yahweh. The high places, however, were not removed. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. Jehoshaphat also made peace with the king of Israel. He banished from the land the male shrine prostitutes, the Kadesh, who remained from the days of his father Asa. So the Kadesh are mentioned previously by Asa chasing him away. This is the second time they're getting chased out of town. All right, so then Ahab's death is one of the more vivid stories in 1 Kings 22. He's disguised himself on the battlefield, so he wasn't dressed as a king, so they didn't know it was him. But a randomly fired arrow found the gap in his armor. When his chariot was brought back, the dogs licked his blood from the floor, fulfilling Elijah's prophecy exactly. There's a much longer story with Ahab talking to another prophet, and Ahab gets a bad prophecy from the prophet of Yahweh. That's why he's not dressed as the king. That's why he's going hidden. It's a whole long thing. So now 1 Kings 22, back to Israel. Ahaziah, the son of Ahab, became king of Israel, and he reigned in Samaria for 2 years. And he did evil in the sight of Yahweh, and walked in the ways of his father and mother, and of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who had caused Israel to sin. Ahaziah served and worshipped Baal, provoking Yahweh, the God of Israel, to anger, just as his father had done. So young King Ahaziah proved less capable than his father and grandfather. After a serious fall inside his own palace, where he's badly injured, he sent messengers to consult Baal-zebub of Ekron, but a prophet of Yahweh intercepted them and announced the king's imminent death. The name Baal-zebub means Lord of the Flies, and is almost certainly a mocking distortion coined by the biblical writers, rather than the God's actual name. So Baal means Lord, and then you get Baal Hadad and Baal this, Baal that, and there's many, many different Baals because it's a generic term for Lord. And just as we use God in a lot of different ways. But Baal-zebub, Zebub literally means of the flies. So it's like Lord of shit, basically. And then that in turn is goes on right through the Middle Ages, and Beelzebub becomes a demon, and medieval demonography, and the name lives on in infamy. So this is now we're in the book of 2 Kings 1. The Hebrews have it all as one long book, but the Christians separate them into 2 books. So now Ahaziah had fallen through the lattice of his upper room in Samaria and injured himself. So he sent messengers and instructed them, "Go inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron, whether I will recover from this injury." But the angel of Yahweh said to Elijah the Tishbite, "Go up to meet the messengers of the king of Samaria and ask them, is it because there is no God in Israel that you're on your way to inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron? Therefore, this is what Yahweh says, you will not get up from the bed on which you are lying. You will surely die." Which he does die. So Ahaziah was succeeded by his brother Jehoram. Shortly after, the prophet Elijah died and was taken up to heaven in his final supernatural act, passing his mantle onto the prophet Elisha. And Elisha was not very nice to children. This, I found, is one of the most hilarious stories in the entire Bible. 2 Kings 2, 23 and 24. We've just met Elisha for the first time. He does some supernatural stuff, and then he's walking down the road. From there, Elisha went to Bethel, and as he was walking up the road, a group of boys came out of the city and jeered at him, chanting, "Go on up, you bald head. Go up, you bald head." Then he turned around, looked at them, and called down a curse on them in the name of Yahweh. Suddenly, 2 female bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the boys. So,
So can I just say that I think it's really interesting that little story about him, because the Yahwehs are like, oh, you're doing evil and witchcraft and all of this stuff, but then literally calling a curse down by Yahweh. So, I mean, who's doing the witchcraft there, right?
right, totally.
Yeah.
And it's one of those embarrassing stories in the Bible that bothers theologians because, it's not a particularly flattering story for your own profit. So Moab's rebellion, which we covered last week alongside the Mesha Stele, is recorded in 2 Kings 3. It really should go here in the narrative. In the next draft, it'll be adjusted. Elisha performs a series of healings and miracles before ultimately setting in motion a bloody palace coup that would claim many lives. Elisha instructed one of the sons of the prophets, that's their group, to go to the battlefield, find the Israelite commander Jehu, and anoint him king of Israel. Those are the instructions that they had gotten before from Yahweh. So Jehu is a confirmed historical figure who ruled Israel from 841 to 814 BCE. He is the earliest king in the biblical narrative to be verified in the archaeological record. His name is also one of the earliest theophoric names for Yahweh, meaning Yahweh is he. So the J names, the J-A, not all of them, but oftentimes, because it's not true for Jezebel, but oftentimes you see the J-E at the beginning of the name. That's a Yahweh name. That means it's coming out of a Yahweh family. It's that cultural group. And so it's an easy way to determine which kings are the Yahweh kings. Jehoshaphat and Joash, they're Yahweh kings. So the emergence of theophoric names is a key marker scholars use to trace the spread of Yahwism as a cultural force. It's true for all cultures. Jehoshaphat and Joash are 2 other Yahweh-rooted names from the same 9th century BC. So Jezebel has the name Baal in her name. Hannibal, the general from Carthage, has the name Baal in his name. Anytime you see Hannibal or Jezebel, like those are all Baal people, as opposed to the Yahweh people. And it's true of like Christian names. You'll see Peter and stuff all over. And that's how, with the name Moses, that's why a lot of scholars think that the Pentateuch is written way late, like the Hellenistic time period, because that's when you start to see the name Moses show up culturally in Jewish names, like in naming children Moses is only from like the 2nd century forward. Like the name Moses doesn't get used culturally anywhere in Israelite culture, anywhere until after the Torah is written, which is kind of an interesting little detail. That's why a lot of scholars think Moses is like a later invention, or the stories are later inventions. So this is the evidence we have of Jehu. This is the black obelisk of Shalmaneser III. He is who from around 841 BC. This depicts Jehu or his envoy prostrating before the Assyrian king, providing extra biblical confirmation of his reign and his date. The original of this is held in the British Museum, and this is an AI rendering I did just to clean it up to make it easier to see. But this guy prostrating himself down in front of the guy on the left is the Assyrian king, and the guy prostrating himself is meant to be Jehu, king of Israel. And in the cuneiform, it describes Jehu, king of Israel. And so this was, a victory stele by the Assyrian king, Shalmaneser III.
Is that image there faithful? Is that a exaggeration, or is that you said cleaned it up?
No, it's pretty clean.
Okay.
It's a very large monument, and this is one panel. All 4 sides have like multiple rows, at least 4, maybe more rows. And this is one of the rows from one of the sides. So it's like a big monument. It's like 6 feet tall or something. And the original one's all beat up. It's kind of hard to see.
I mean, is Jehu wearing a Phrygian cap there? I mean, what's he wearing on his head?
That's a good question, and I would go back. I did try to look at it to make sure these things were pretty good, but I would go back to the original one to start digging into those questions. This is for illustrative purposes only, not for scholarly purposes. But I've been playing with the AI stuff. I think it's effective in stuff like this. I'm not trying to be the scholar here. You can click the link in the article, and it's got where it takes you back to the British Museum page, and you can see the original one for yourself. So even the Bible cannot fully rehabilitate Jehu. He comes across as a treasonous and murderous, and his killing spree is remembered with shame by the later prophet Hosea, in Hosea 1:4-5, which will be next week. Upon his anointing by Elisha, or by the sons of prophets, Jehu assassinated both the king of Israel and the king of Judah, who happened to be together, along with the queen mother Jezebel and their extended families, dozens of people in all. The assassination of Jezebel is particularly symbolic, as we will see. Jehu was a committed Yahwist. He destroyed the temple of Baal and massacred everyone inside, but paganism did not disappear from Israel. The biblical writers complain that the golden calves at Bethel and Dan remained standing, and the context makes clear that goddess worship continued and the Kadeshah remained untouched. It is precisely this time period that has yielded the most significant archaeological evidence linking Yahweh and Asherah. We'll probably do a dedicated episode on just the archaeology of all the shards pottery shards and stuff that say Yahweh and Asherah. There's probably a good amount of evidence for just like one dedicated episode. Because there's a bunch of it's on these various pottery shards, and there's a couple engravings from like some tombs and just random stuff that say Yahweh and his Asherah. So this is back in the Bible. This is a long one here. This is the assassination scene. So this is sorry about this. 2 Kings 9. And any comments before I jump into this? This is the big bloody part here. All right. So Jehu got up and went into the house where the young prophet poured the oil on his head, the anointing oil, and declared, "This is what Yahweh, the God of Israel, says. I anoint you king over Yahweh's people, Israel, and you are to strike down the house of your master Ahab, so that I may avenge the blood of my servants, the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of Yahweh shed by the hand of Jezebel. The whole house of Ahab will perish, and I will cut off Ahab from every male, both slave and free in Israel. I will make the house of Ahab like the houses of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and Baasha, son of Ahijah. And on the plot of ground at Jezreel, the dogs will devour Jezebel, and there will be no one to bury her." Then Jehu got into his chariot and went to Jezreel, because Joram was laid up there, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, had gone down to see him. Now the watchman standing on the tower in Jezreel saw Jehu's troops approaching, and he called out, "I see a company of troops." "Choose a rider," Joram commanded. "Send him out to meet them and ask, 'Have you come in peace?'" So a horseman rode off to meet Jehu and said, "This is what the king asks. Have you come in peace?" "What do you know about peace?" Jehu replied. "Fall in behind me." And the watchman reported, "The messenger reached them, but he is not coming back." So the king sent out a second horseman, who went to them and said, "This is what the king asks. Have you come in peace?" "What do you know about peace?" Jehu replied. "Fall in behind me." Again the watchman reported, "He reached them, but he's not coming back. And the charioteer is driving like Jehu, son of Nimshi. He is driving like a madman." "Harness!" Joram shouted, and they harnessed his chariot. Then Joram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, set out, each in his own chariot, and met Jehu on the property of Naboth, the Jezreelite. Naboth being the name of the guy who had the vineyard that was murdered earlier. So all this murder takes place in the vineyard, and these bodies are all killed in the vineyard. When Joram saw Jehu, he asked, "Have you come in peace, Jehu?" "How can there be peace?" he replied, "as long as the idolatry and witchcraft of your mother Jezebel abound." Joram turned around and fled, calling out to Ahaziah, "Treachery, Ahaziah!" Then Jehu drew his bow and shot Joram between the shoulders. The arrow pierced his heart, and he slumped down in his chariot. When King Ahaziah of Judah saw this, he fled up the road toward Beth Hagan. And Jehu pursued him, shouting, "Shoot him too!" So they shot Ahaziah in his chariot on the ascent of Gur, near Ibleam, and he fled to Megiddo and died there. Now when Jehu arrived at Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it. So she painted her eyes, adorned her head, and looked down from a window. And as Jehu entered the gate, she asked, "Have you come in peace, O Zimri, murderer of your master?" He looked up at the window and called out, "Who is on my side? Who?" And 2 or 3 of the eunuchs looked down at him. "Throw her down," yelled Jehu. So they threw her down, and her blood splattered on the wall and on the horses as they trampled her underfoot. Then Jehu went in and ate and drank. Take care of this cursed woman, he said, and bury her, for she was the daughter of a king. But when they went out to bury her, they found nothing but her skull, her hands, and the palms of her skull, her feet, and the palms of her hands. So they went back and told Jehu, who replied, "This is the word of Yahweh, which he spoke through his servant Elijah the Tishbite. On the plot of ground at Jezreel, the dogs will devour the flesh of Jezebel, and Jezebel's body will lie like dung in the field on the plot of ground at Jezreel, so that no one can say, 'This is Jezebel.'" So Jezebel faced her death with dignity, taking time to paint her eyes and dress her hair before appearing at the window. She was thrown down by her own palace eunuchs, her blood splattering on the stones below. Her flesh was consumed by dogs, fulfilling Elijah's grisly prophecy to the letter. Her defenestration is one of the most loaded images in the Hebrew Bible. A great queen, hurled from her own window, devoured in the street. Over the centuries, Jezebel's name has become synonymous with female treachery, sexual manipulation, temptation, and wickedness, a shorthand for everything the patriarchal tradition feared in a powerful woman. She is comparable, and I think this is really important. She is comparable to the tragic queen figure Clytemnestra of the Greeks, the Greek figure Clytemnestra, killed by her son Orestes in revenge for the death of his father Agamemnon, whom she had killed, as told in Aeschylus's Oresteia. Both Jezebel and Clytemnestra were politically powerful queens representing older matriarchal traditions, recast as villains in Iron Age patriarchal narratives that celebrated their gruesome deaths as righteous justice. So, yeah, I want to stop on that for a second. We can pause here for a moment. I really think so. Clytemnestra is this. These are the characters from the Iliad. Agamemnon is the leader of the Iliad with Achilles and everybody. When he comes back from Troy, Clytemnestra has been his queen, ruling in it while he was gone for 10 years, and she has a bone to pick because he had sacrificed their daughter. So when he comes back, she murders him, and that sets off this famous Greek tragedy called the Oresteia, named for their son Orestes, who then has to kill his mother. And it's a very long story. And that's, to me, both of these characters represent these powerful queens that were ruling as matriarchal queens, ruling with these old matriarchal prerogatives in these older Bronze Age traditions where the sexual cults are going on and women have inheritances. Jezebel did not necessarily have an inheritance, but Clytemnestra does. Helen of Troy does. And then also Odysseus' wife, also Penelope. The women are inheriting the throne. And so in that these Bronze Age traditions are what's being overthrown. And then both the Bible and the Greek mythology are celebrating because they're firmly patriarchal. So by the time they get to writing down these stories, these things have happened hundreds of years in the past, and they're celebrating the overthrow of these old matriarchal villainous women that they don't like, who held power once upon a time, but we're not going to let them have power anymore. And so I see them as highly comparable. And Clytemnestra might have, there's an argument that those characters from the Iliad are real people. That Agamemnon was a real person, that Helen of Troy was a real person. There's not evidence for it, but there's a possible evidence. We know that Jezebel is a real person. But yeah, we can stop here, talk about the throwing down from the window. Any comments? Lisa, you look like you got something to say there.
Totally, because the story that you just told about Clytemnestra really reminds me of the Enuma Elish, where the dragon killed her husband, right? And then her son had to kill her. What was that? Marduk, right?
Yeah, Marduk gets to destroy Tiamat, who's the great mother goddess.
Tiamat.
Great as a villain.
Yes. She's a dragon, right? And so he splits her open to create the worlds. But it just seems to me that there's a little bit of, some overlap in the way those mythologies work.
I make a direct comparison of all of that entire line in my book, that over the course of the Bronze Age, we're seeing the rise of the patriarchy. And then when we get into the Iron Age, the patriarchy drops the axe once and for all. And so Marduk overthrowing Tiamat, who's the great salt waters of creation, and she's cast as a villain. Whereas in the older Sumerian, the saltwater mother goddess is kind, and she creates humans. But then the Babylonians come later on; they're more patriarchal, and then we get a third iteration here. There's also 3 flood stories that match those 3 generations. So I make that direct comparison, and I think you're definitely correct.
Clear, from where we began Goddess Bible study back in August to now, like we're getting into Kings, and this is where all the violence really comes into play, right? This is where it gets bloody and violent and like power mongering, and like they're just going through and they're getting rid of everybody. And I made this comparison last week or 2 weeks ago. Like it's Game of Thrones. Like I'm thinking the guy that wrote Game of Thrones was really inspired by the King's chapters, because some of it is almost like verbatim what was done according to these passages. Was so much of that was also portrayed in that long saga that is Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I mean, whoever's the warlord that can take the throne by force gets the throne, but they've also got to work hand in hand with the priesthood. The kings and the priesthoods are these parallel power structures, and so the king has to be justified by the local priest to have the anointed by the priesthood to have the credibility with the public, right? And so you get, as the kings get more powerful, the priesthoods get more powerful in parallel until you get all the way to like the Catholic Church, where it's like they consolidate power completely. And these imperial religions, because the religions we know about, the ones that were literate, were all imperial religions. Both the Egyptians and the Mesopotamian religions are coming. These are the organized religions that go with organized society. We don't have the religion of the illiterate or non-literate, we should say, indigenous peoples, because they left no evidence. So we have no idea what they believed, except for vague generalities. The only ones we know of are the ones that come from the kings that had they could have the scribes that could write them down. And then those in turn, as these imperial power structures get replicated for just practical political reasons, the religions get replicated as well. They'll tweak the names, tweak the stuff as you go down the road, but you're keeping the basic structure intact because it serves this social political control mechanism to structure society. And these are the traditions that end up living on.
I also was like, and reading through this, I was like, okay, well, Jehu certainly is like a Yahwist, because it seems like, Yahweh's attitudes about things and, like what he wants done. And, that Yahweh is angry, vengeful, and then here he's got the perfect vessel to carry out his work in Jehu.
Let's chat a minute. I want to get his thoughts on the being thrown down from the window and the symbolism of that. If that inspires any thoughts from you.
Well, yeah, and Joshua, your mic is still muted, but certainly like the fall of the feminine, the fall of the queen, the fall of the goddess, right? That's what that is. And there's nothing left of her, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean I think they coined the word defenestration, which is a French word for being thrown from a window. And I think the term is framed, I think, from this story. It's like because you do hear about people being thrown from windows, like when the KGB assassinated the guy just fell out of a window.
They're still doing it.
But I do think the word comes from and and is inspired by. I think this is the most famous defenestration from the ancient world. That's for sure. So anyway, we can get back into it.
I want to.
Yeah.
I'd like to make a comment just on. We're talking a lot of the politics of this, but I'm thinking also just the cultural, theological underpinnings that probably would have appealed to the people at this time. And earlier on in the story, you're talking about, when Elijah spared the prophets of Asherah, but killed the prophets of Baal.
Right.
And it sure seems like, from just possibly a folk standpoint here, we're not in pure monotheistic, God's a single masculine entity. We're looking at two storm gods fighting over a girl of who gets to spread their water seed on Mother Earth here. And you have two patriarchal patriarchy is starting to rise in whether it's Baal or, Yahweh. And they're fighting over who's going to get hegemony over Asher. That's how I read them. That's how I read that, them not killing the prophets of Asherah. Why wouldn't you do that? I mean, if we're not at the point where we're annihilating Asherah, I guess, right here.
No, that comes a century later when they really move hard on Asherah.
Yeah.
But at this time period, no, you're absolutely right. He's got to capture the girl and marry the girl before he can divorce her. So
right.
He's got to get the goddess on his side first. So Yahweh's got his hands full just fighting with Baal and trying to become king of the gods in Israel. And getting rid of the goddesses comes later. But you can tell they're clearly are already, are instigating with them. I mean, they've cut down some Asherah poles already, but the real Asherah pole cutting down comes a little bit later.
Well, it mentioned like making an image of Asherah, and that was somehow
that was with Makah and Asa.
Maybe because she was identified with the earth, purely the earth, rather than some formation or idol or something. Maybe that.
I don't know. I wonder what the carved image was. That's what I was saying. Something.
I think it's important to bear in mind the relationship between gods and humans, because gods are not, a corporeal. They're not in the 3D time-space continuum on Earth. So they necessarily need humans to, be their lackeys and, and to carry out their wishes in order for things to happen that they want, right? And so I just think that that's really interesting, because if that's the case, then the humans actually have quite a bit of power. And not only do humans have quite a bit of power, but they can and necessarily should, if you're working with gods, negotiate what you're going to get out of it, and also what your boundaries are. I will do this for you, but I won't do that. This kind of a thing. So I just think that that's, something interesting, because here humans think they don't have that much power necessarily, and they're like, oh, we're deferring to the gods to like bring us what we want or whatever. But it's sort of the other way around,
Oh yeah, I think goes way back into Sumeria. The understanding to them was we were created to serve them. We were created to, some say dig in the mines, grab the gold, bring it to them, but to feed them also. There's stories of that. And so like this idea of us serving them is deeply in the human psyche. So like choose ye right now, Israel, who you're going to serve. Israel, or Yahweh, choose your God. Who are you going to bring your sacrifices to? Yeah, this idea of serving a God that needs something from us is somehow deeply in the human psyche here.
Yeah, you had to feed the gods, and the gods would get hungry, and if no one was serving up a barbecue for them.
Yeah, it's not like this passionless God that doesn't suffer hunger that will come later in high Christian theology.
And not omnipotent, not omnipotent gods.
It's very dependent gods upon humans to keep them alive. One last point I want to make is the name Jezebel, which is interesting. There's one, I just looked this up. There was one way of translating that, of her name, is that Baal is husband. So it is a declaration that Baal is the husband of Asherah, not Yahweh's the husband of Asherah. So again, it feeds into that whole thing of like, we have guys fighting over the girl, which is just the ancient story.
That's next week's topic. You're jumping the
Okay.
gun, Joshua.
Sorry.
That's what we talk about with the prophet Hosea. That's exactly, you will no longer call me my Bailey. You will call me my Ishi and not my Bailey.
Okay. Great.
So we'll be fighting over the wife next week. All right, so let's get through the rest of the reading here. So Jehu was not finished, having killed both kings of Israel and Judah in a single campaign, and the queen mother of Israel. He systematically hunted down and killed their families, all of them. His most sacrilegious act came last. He invited every remaining servant of Baal to a great sacrifice at the temple, locked the doors, and slaughtered everyone inside. Then he desecrated the temple itself, turning it into a latrine. And in doing so, he wipes out Baal worship and institutes Yahweh worship. It's still pagan Yahweh, but it's Yahweh, not Baal. So now we're into the Bible. Now the sons of the king Ahab, 70 in all, were being brought up by the leading men of the city. When the letter arrived, they took the sons of the king and slaughtered all 70 of them. Then they put their heads in baskets and sent them to Jehu at Jezreel. So Jehu killed everyone in Jezreel who remained of the house of Ahab, as well as all of his great men and close friends and priests, leaving him without a single survivor. I mean, it sounds like hundreds of people, really. Then Jehu set out towards Samaria. At Beth-Eked of the shepherds, Jehu met some relatives of Ahaziah, king of Judah, and asked, "Who are you?" "We are relatives of Ahaziah," they answered, "and we have come down to greet the sons of the king and the queen mother." Then Jehu ordered, "Take them alive." So his men took them alive, then slaughtered them at the wall of Beth-Eked, 42 men. He spared none of them. Then Jehu brought all the people together and said, "Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu will serve him a lot. Now therefore summon to me all the prophets of Baal, all his servants and all his priests. See that no one is missing, for I have a great sacrifice for Baal. Whoever is missing will not live." But Jehu was acting deceptively in order to destroy the servants of Baal. And Jehu commanded, "Proclaim a solemn assembly for Baal." So they announced it. Then Jehu sent word throughout Israel, and all the servants of Baal came, and there was not a man who failed to show. They entered the temple of Baal, and it was filled from end to end. And Jehu said to the keeper of the wardrobe, "Bring out the garments for the servants of Baal." So he brought out the garments for them. Next Jehu and Jehonadab, son of Rechab, entered the temple of Baal, and Jehu said to the servants of Baal, "Look around to see that there are no servants of Yahweh here among you, only servants of Baal." And they went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. Now Jehu had stationed 80 men outside and warned them, "If anyone allows one of the men I am delivering into your hands to escape, he will forfeit his life for theirs." When he had finished making the burnt offerings, Jehu said to the guards and officers, "Go in and kill them. Do not let anyone out." So the guards and officers put them to the sword, threw the bodies out, and went into the inner room of the temple of Baal. They brought out the sacred pillar of the temple of Baal and burned it. They also demolished the sacred pillar of Baal. Then they tore down the temple of Baal and made it into a latrine, which it is to this day. Thus Jehu eradicated Baal from Israel, but he did not turn away from the sins that Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had caused Israel to commit, the worship of the golden calves at Bethel and Dan. Nevertheless, Yahweh said to Jehu, "Because you have done well in carrying out what is right in my sight, and have done to the house of Ahab all that was in my heart, 4 generations of your sons will sit on the throne of Israel." 2 Kings 10, 6-30. So there is no clear archaeological evidence that this particular temple desecration occurred, but archaeologists did discover a different Judean temple at Lachish that was desecrated by the installation of a toilet, confirming it was at least a known practice. Jehu proved to be a successful king, establishing a dynasty in Israel that lasted 4 generations, and yet once again the Yahwists succeeded against Baal, but made no headway against paganism more broadly. The golden calves at Bethel and Dan remain standing, Asherah worship goes unconfronted, and Asherah poles are not mentioned. The divine council was intact, In the 9th century BC, Yahweh was still one God among many. Our third and final queen mother in this tragic trilogy is Athalia, the daughter of Jezebel and Ahab, who was the wife of the king of Judah, and queen mother and ultimately the sole ruler of Jerusalem in her own right. So Athalia is a pretty tough chick in her own right here, as you will see. After Jehu killed her son, King Ahaziah, and decimated her family, Athalia launched a killing spree of her own, slaughtering the remaining royal heirs to seize the throne for herself. One infant survived, hidden away by a family member in the temple. Athalia is the only woman in history to rule from Jerusalem as a sovereign queen. She held the throne for 6 years, from 841 to 835 BC, until the Yahwists assassinated her and installed the now 7-year-old Joash as king and tore down the temple of Baal. So, 2 Kings 11, when Athalia, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she proceeded to annihilate all the royal heirs. But Jehosheba, daughter of King Joram, the sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the sons of the king who were being murdered. She put him and his nurse in a bedroom to hide him from Athalia, and he was not killed. And Joash remained hidden with his nurse in the house of Yahweh for 6 years, while Athalia ruled the land. 6 years goes by. Then Jehoiada, who was the high priest, brought out the king's son, put the crown on him, presented him with testimony, and proclaimed him king. They anointed him, and the people clapped their hands and declared, "Long live the king." When Athalia heard the noise from the guards and the people, she went out to the people in the house of Yahweh. Then she looked out and saw the king standing by the pillar, according to the custom. The officers and trumpeters were beside the king, and all the people of the land were rejoicing and blowing trumpets. Then Athalia tore her clothes and screamed, "Treason! Treason!" And Jehoiada the priest ordered the commanders of hundreds in charge of the army, "Bring her out between the ranks and put to the sword anyone who follows her." For the priest had said she must not be put to death in the house of Yahweh. So they seized Athalia as she reached the horses' entrance to the palace grounds, and there she was put to death. So all the people of the land went to the temple of Baal and tore it down. They smashed the altars and idols to pieces, and they killed Matan, the priest of Baal, in front of the altars. That's 2 Kings 11. So Joash ruled in Jerusalem for 40 years, from age 7 to age 47, before he was also killed in a palace coup. Yahweh, it must be said, was never particularly reliable when it came to protecting his kings. So that's it for tonight. Next episode, we'll talk about Hosea and Gomer. So any comments on Athalia or Jehu? I had personally never heard of Athalia before doing these readings and did not remember her at all. And they never talk about a woman who ruled in Jerusalem solo. So I think that makes her an interesting little historical character.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I forgot all about this story until reading this in preparation for tonight.
Had to make her out to be a bad guy. I mean, so whether she did these things or not, I mean, do you know, Ed, archaeological,
I don't think there's any archaeology for
evidence?
her.
Yeah.
We have enough archaeology to let us, think all these kings are real kings, but not the minor ones are not. We don't really know about. We know about the major kings, the ones that stuck around for a while. We know about all the Assyrian kings, but we don't know about every single of the minor kings.
I think that there is a interesting play here going on. I don't know if this is intentional or just accidental. It's hard to believe. I mean, because these stories have only just so much information and detail in them. But you think of the Phoenician woman, Jezebel, from Phoenicia, Tyre, Sidon, right? And this whole thing of her being eaten up by dogs.
Right.
And then you think of in the New Testament story with Jesus, where they make mention of that Phoenician woman who comes to her and asks for bread. And he's like, should I give the bread of the Jews and give it to the dogs? And I wonder if there's any play between these stories of somehow trying to show this Phoenician woman who would be like considered maybe like a descendant of Jezebel, like somehow still bowing down to this.
At the
to
time
Yahweh.
of Jesus.
The Phoenician woman.
Right. I'm not familiar with that story. I mean, Phoenicia wasn't really much of a cultural entity at that point, although their descendants live on. I have a Lebanese friend who said she considers herself indigenous to Lebanon, and her family consider themselves descendants of the Phoenicians, because they've just simply lived in Lebanon forever. But Phoenicia, I mean, they get demoed by the Assyrians, they get demoed by the Persians and Alexander the Great. And then Carthage is a Phoenician. So the Phoenicians are really super interesting people who, when we come out of the Bronze Age collapse, they're the richest and most successful people and most sophisticated people
Travelers
in the entire Mediterranean. They're the first people to travel by sail or to really navigate, I mean, by the stars, and really travel around extensively around the Mediterranean. They're the first really great sailors. They're super sophisticated artists and super sophisticated tradespeople who don't have a big military presence. They have trading colonies, and they rely on mercenaries to protect them, and they don't have a big standing armies of their own, and they don't have an empire of their own. It's all a bunch of independent city-states. So Tyre has got its own king, and Sidon has its own king, and they're united by culture, but not by politics. And they're fabulously wealthy. And Tyre is this really interesting place because Tyre was an island, and it's no longer an island, thanks to Alexander the Great. But it was an island with this impenetrable fortress, like 150 feet above the water, and that resisted any kind of outside. The Assyrians could never conquer it. They conquered the mainland side, but nobody could conquer the independent island of Tyre, which seems like why they come out of the Bronze Age collapse successfully. Like they don't get wrecked by the sea peoples when everybody else is getting wrecked. They survive. And but Alexander the Great, when he conquers them, he builds a battlement all the way out. It's like a kilometer offshore. He fills the channel with debris and wood and stuff, and builds a channel and builds a battlement all the way out to the island under duress, like they're being fought off the entire time. It takes them almost a year. And then Alexander the Great leads his troops over the walls, and they slaughter everybody inside the city. And Tyre is now a peninsula to this day. It's no longer an island. But back in the day, it had this impenetrable fortress. All this stuff is so Game of Thrones. The city fortress of Tyre just sounds absolutely amazing and needs to be illustrated. Yeah, I forget where I was even going with all that. But yeah, they were super interesting people.
So, if you're going to bring up, say, like, descendants and ancestors and like where somebody hails from, part of what, like, a question that arose in me is if all of these kings of Israel and their families have been completely killed off, right? Like genocided,
Right.
then what about the lineage, the blood lineage of Yeshua, Jesus? Like
Right.
how does, because
Well, that's a
clearly
question for
I'm
That's a
not
question for the father here.
specifically
Like, how do they trace the lineages of Jesus back
right.
to
So
these?
like clearly I'm not specifically trying to track that myself, but I know that there are points in the Bible where they like go on to say, where, how it flows through. But I'm like, but they just killed off all the kings of Israel. So how is
It's in
Jesus
Judah,
still a
though.
descendant?
The bloodline of Jesus back to King David runs through Jerusalem and runs through Judah. And so that runs through Josiah, ultimately, who is the last member of the house of David, who's going to come later on. He's one of the big reformers. And then they get killed by the Babylonians. I'm not sure how they track the lineage. You can definitely track it in the Bible through Josiah, King Josiah, right down. But after that, I don't know how they keep track of it from the Babylonian exile all the way, which is 586 BC, to Jesus. Do you know, Joshua?
Mm-mm. What was the question again?
Well, like, how did you track the bloodline from Jesus back to these kings when all these kings all the houses are being wiped out? So the house of David does survive, though, at least to the Babylonian exile. It's these other houses, the house of Ahab or the house of Omri is his father. That's one gets destroyed here by Jehu, and then the house of Jehu lasts for a while. then he gets over, his ancestors or his descendants will get overthrown at a certain point.
Well, and remember, there's always that rule that if someone doesn't have a descendant, then the brother raises up the seed in his name and takes on that name of his father, even though if it's his brother too. So
right.
There was workarounds with all that.
I mean, in the Northern Kingdom, they ultimately get wiped out by the Assyrians, which will probably be 2 episodes from now. They'll, and that's the 12 tribes or 10 of the 12 tribes are then at that point lost in the wind of history. And you've got just the 2 tribes left in Judah, Judah and Benjamin. And they go into the Babylon exile, and those tribes get lost. So now there's no, but I mean, the Christians obviously worked out these bloodlines a long time ago. Like that was a big deal. I mean, the Jews had it all worked out. How they track their bloodlines back to King David.
Well, I think that's really interesting, and I wonder, much like so much that's in the Bible, how much has been manipulated, right, to make sure that bloodline appears to be, unbroken.
Well, of course it's been manipulated.
I mean, the whole thing is, manipulated, and it's very fascinating, anyway, like especially the way that we get to discuss it all. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, the Game of Thrones analogy just really keeps kicking because, I mean, all these folks, and it's going to keep on going. Like, it's just off of their head and take the throne, off their head, take the throne, off their head, take the throne. Even Athalia is doing it. It's all very blood and guts. No democracy, right? This is all, but it's a form of government that lasts for a very long time. I mean, the Eastern Orthodox Empire, I always joke, had this, I think it was funny. Somebody pointed out a very stable form of government that lasted 1,000 years, which was the monarch had absolute power to do anything and everything. But it was tempered by the absolute right of revolt. So whoever took the throne, it could be anybody. You did not have to be a royal person to take the throne. Whoever could kill the king and successfully take the throne for themselves, you could be a peasant leading an uprising. If you got to take the throne, well, that's because God obviously wanted you to take the throne, so you get the power. And so absolute autocracy by whoever occupies the throne, tempered by the absolute right of revolt by anyone who can pull it off, who can pull off a coup successfully. And if you get to sit in the chair, well, that's because God clearly favored you. And if you only sit there for 48 hours, it's like, well, he didn't favor you very much, I guess.
Very busy.
Well,
yeah, that's the business.
Yeah, I mean, they're just that understanding. Well, it's God, just it's clear that people were very divorced from their own personal agency and power, and understanding, that the choices that they make and the things that they did would, create whatever consequences, right? Versus, well, it's God ordained it, or, this thing worked out, so God said it was, that it was how it was meant to be, as opposed to, like co-creation and personal agency. And it just sounds like everything was outside of their hands. And that works too, especially if it's imperialism, right? Like, you don't want the people to think that they have personal agency or personal power to make something happen or to create a thing, right? So of course, God.
Yeah, and also there's no spirit of like cooperation anywhere. It's always dominance. At every turn, it's dominance. And there's no ethic of cooperation, which would have been happening among the peasants who are like farming. They would still be cooperative with one another. And cooperation as a socialist ethic is like pretty basic to biology, basic in nature, and its fundamental like goddess traditions is that they're more social and they're more sharing of everything. And so the spirit of cooperation that is what gets lost as the goddess gets demoted, it becomes more society becomes increasingly more hierarchical and authoritarian. And this is what we're seeing tumbling down with every century as we go in the story. It's getting more bloody, more violent, more dominance hierarchies, and that this continues for the next 1,000 years or so, or right up to the modern day. Um,
We appear to have a president who thinks that he gets to be, just like those imperialistic rulers, and I think like, feeling like he's somehow sort of ordained to have absolute power, as you were saying, like, they had absolute power. And yeah, I mean, it persists, and I think part of why that persists is because of monotheism,
yeah, and I mean, as long
patriarchy.
as people keep going back to the Bible for their inspiration, for their morality, and for their social codes, you just constantly get reminded to engage in these dominance exercises, and that's all the model that's presented to us. It's like at every turn. I mean, the exception is Jesus, who's he doesn't do dominance, but the whole Old Testament is nothing but dominance, um, and very little cooperation. Um, Anything else?
Well,
We should wrap it up.
yeah, so wrap it up. Joshua, what do you have to say?
Oh, I was just, we can wrap it up, but I've just been kind of my comment earlier. I'm just kind of struck by the imagery of Jezebel being thrown from the window and the dogs eat her up, and this story from the New Testament by this woman from the same location. I just want to read this real quick because I think there's something going on here if we have a second.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because this is from St. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 15, 21 through 28. And it says, "And Jesus went away from there and withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon.
Okay.
And behold, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and cried, 'Have mercy on me, O Lord, son of David. My daughter is severely possessed by a demon.'" And I'm thinking about how, they made Jezebel out to be witchcraft and,
Sure.
But he did not answer her a word. And his disciples came and begged him, saying, "Send her away, for she is crying after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Now remember, this is like Israel and Judah fighting back then. The lost sheep of Israel was like, because Israel went into apostasy after all these other gods, right? That's how that's how I'm reading this. "But she came and knelt before him, saying, 'Lord, help me.' And he answered, 'It is not fair to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs.' And she said, 'Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table.' Then Jesus answered her, 'O woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire.' And her daughter was healed immediately." Do you think that
No,
there
I'm
was
not.
any?
I was not. That's a good point. I wasn't familiar with that story, but I totally think you're right. The Tyre and Sidon is obviously a reference to Jezebel. Also, the tribe of Asher, one of the 12 tribes, is named for Asherah. The tribe of Asher is an Asherah named tribe, and that's that region. It's Tyre, Sidon, and the Phoenician coast.
Yeah,
Is
there
where
is
the tribe of
something
Asher
there.
comes from.
There's
That's
that's amazing.
that's very much associated with goddess stuff. And then there's this huge, one of the biggest temple sites in the ancient world is Baalbek, Lebanon, which is in
Right.
the Bekaa Valley, and there's this massive temple to Baal and Astarte, and then Dionysus, and then the Romans rebuilt it as Jupiter and Venus.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really famous site. It's really got it's got the trilithon stones, and so yeah, that whole region is super goddess stuff for sure, and by the Israel, and stands off from the Israelites. So I don't remember that story. Like, I only will help the people of Israel, says Jesus. That was interesting. Like,
Yeah.
but then he helps her anyway.
"I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." I
A
mean,
shepherding reference.
do you think she was speaking to that, what happened to her? Because that was a prophecy. You're going to fall down and dogs are going to eat you. on the land of Jezreel. I mean, that was what was prophesied before that happened, right?
I have to believe that the use of the word dog.
They're playing that game. They're making a connection there. Okay.
I read it that way.
Yeah.
I mean, other people might have different opinions, but they don't. I mean, the Bible is so loaded. Every single word is so intentional.
Oh, it is.
That stuff like that doesn't happen by accident, you know.
Dogs as a metaphor, even for like, say, lowly people or what have you. But yeah,
and in the laws of Deuteronomy, when it says your daughter should not be a kadesha and your son will not be a kadesh, you will not bring the wages of a whore or the wage or something about the wages of a dog into the temple, and they're calling the kadesh dogs, and in the context of being whores and temple sodomites. I'd have to pull up that quote.
Well, and there's this whole thing about the dog-headed people in the ancient world too. I can't remember all that whole mythos behind all that, but whether that was known in this time or not, I don't.
Sounds like racism to me.
Let me see.
Find it, Ed.
Anyway, I didn't mean to like keep the thing going, but it just kept on ringing in my
wheels are turning.
Mm-hmm.
No Israelite woman is to be a cult prostitute. No Israelite man is to be a cult prostitute. Do not bring a female prostitute's wages or a male prostitute's earnings in the house of the Lord your God to fulfill any vow, because both are detestable with the Lord your God. Doesn't say dog. There was another time where they call him a dog. There is a reference to a dog.
Is it just dependent upon which version of the Bible that that you're looking at?
I'd have to pull it up. Anyway, I don't want to belabor it. Next week we will get out of the Book of Kings. We will return to the Book of Kings, but we're not done with the Book of Kings. But next week we're going to talk about the prophet Hosea and his wife Gomer. One of my favorite parts from a goddess perspective. One of my most best discoveries when I started reading the Bible again for the goddess research. Prophet Hosea, his wife is the woman of adultery, Gomer. It doesn't say she's a Kadesha, but it seems like she's a Kadesha. I mean, she's married to the prophet, and she keeps getting pregnant by other men, and so he tries to shut her down. And it's very poetic, and I read it as like a poem between Yahweh and Astarte, as much as it is it's as much a conversation between God and goddess as it is between Hosea and Gomer. And he's like, we're going to shut down your festivals. We're going to shut down your worship. So it's good stuff. I think she's a Kadesha priestess. And I think it's a really this is really where the divorce papers are starting to be drawn up. They're like, they're in the middle of the dispute now. Like the fight has started. The sacred marriage, the sacred divorce takes a while, for the whole divorce to play out, like 200 years. So now they're like in the big fight on the way to the divorce. So that's what we'll be talking about next week.
Fascinating.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Well, so lostgoddess.io, anyone who's listening to get the write-ups. And thank you, everybody. We'll talk to y'all later.